The phone slipped from Sarah Mitchell's trembling fingers, clattering against the barbershop's linoleum floor as she stared at the motionless man in her chair. Marcus Thompson's head lolled forward, a thin line of blood trickling from beneath the dark, irregular mass she'd just uncovered at his hairline. This wasn't just a mole. It was something alive, pulsing beneath his scalp. Oh God! Oh God! Betty Patterson's coffee mug shattered against the floor as she stumbled backward, her 72-year-old frame shaking violently. The other customers froze mid-conversation, their eyes locked on the nightmare unfolding in chair number 3. Sarah's mind flashed to 3 months ago, Marcus laughing with his daughter, his hair thick and healthy, no sign of the horror now eating through his skull. She'd cut his father's hair in this same chair 20 years ago, right before the cancer took him too. "Call 911 now!" Sarah's voice cracked as she pressed her fingers against Marcus's neck, feeling his pulse growing weaker. What had been growing inside his head all this time? And how many others were walking around, completely unaware of the death spreading beneath their skin? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 days earlier, Marcus Thompson stood in his cramped bathroom staring at his reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. Dark circles shadowed his eyes like bruises, and his once thick brown hair had grown shaggy and unkempt. At 32, he looked a decade older. The prescription bottles lined up on the edge of the sink told their own story: Advil, Tylenol, Imitrex for migraines, and sleeping pills that barely worked anymore. The photograph tucked into the mirror's corner showed a different man entirely. 12-year-old Marcus grinned beside his father outside this very barber shop, both of them sporting fresh cuts from Betty Patterson's steady hands. His father's arm draped proudly around small shoulders, neither knowing that cancer was already spreading through the older man's body, undetected and untreated until it was far too late. "Don't be a burden," his father had whispered from his hospital bed, medical bills already piling up like autumn leaves. "Promise me, son. Take care of yourself, but don't be a burden." Marcus had carried that promise for 20 years, even as the headaches grew worse and his vision blurred during endless hours at his computer screen. The medical bills stacked on his kitchen table totaled $47,000. Emergency room visits, specialist consultations, imaging tests that revealed nothing conclusive. His insurance company had reclassified him as a part-time contractor last month, slashing his coverage just when he needed it most. Sarah Mitchell lived in the small apartment above Patterson's barber shop, where the scent of hair products mixed with the aroma of her morning coffee. She prepared breakfast for her 2 children while medical journals lay open beside the toaster, their pages marked with yellow highlighter. The framed acceptance letter to medical school hung on her kitchen wall, University of Texas, full scholarship, dated 15 years ago. She'd never attended. Her husband's military portrait smiled from the mantelpiece, frozen in time before an undiagnosed brain aneurysm stole him away during what should have been a routine deployment medical check. Sarah had been 28 then, pregnant with their second child, dreams of becoming a doctor buried under the weight of single motherhood and financial necessity. "Mommy, why do you read doctor books if you're not a doctor?" 8-year-old Emma asked, spreading peanut butter on her toast. Sarah touched the medical journal's spine, feeling the familiar ache of roads not taken. "Knowledge is power, sweetheart. Sometimes we have to be our own heroes when the system fails us." Betty Patterson unlocked the barbershop's front door as morning sunlight streamed through the large windows. At 72, she moved with the careful precision of someone who'd spent 50 years perfecting her craft. The old leather barber chairs, polished to a warm glow, held memories of 3 generations of the same families. Marcus's father had occupied chair number 3 every month like clockwork, bringing his boy along to learn the ritual of masculine grooming and community conversation. The barbershop served as more than a place for haircuts. It was the neighborhood's unofficial town hall, where concerns were shared and solutions were found among the steady snip of scissors and gentle hum of conversation. The brass bell above Patterson's barber shop chimed as Marcus Thompson pushed through the heavy glass door, squinting against the afternoon sunlight that seemed to pierce straight through his skull. He hadn't stepped foot in this place for 4 months, not since the headaches had begun stealing his sleep and his concentration. The familiar scent of bay rum aftershave and leather chairs triggered a wave of childhood memories. Saturday mornings with his father, the ritual of masculine grooming, the comfort of community. Sarah Mitchell looked up from sweeping hair clippings around chair number 2, her trained eye immediately cataloging the changes in Marcus's appearance. His skin held a grayish pallor that makeup couldn't hide, and the way he moved, careful, deliberate, like every step might trigger an explosion of pain, sent warning signals through her nervous system. She'd seen this before, in the oncology ward where she'd worked briefly after nursing school, before her husband's death had driven her away from medicine entirely. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," Betty Patterson called from behind the register, her voice carrying the warm authority of someone who'd watched Marcus grow from boy to man. "Marcus Thompson, you look like death warmed over, honey. When's the last time you had a proper meal?" Marcus attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just been working hard, Mrs. Patterson. You know how it is with the Peterson account deadline coming up." He settled into the worn leather of chair number 3, the same seat where his father had shared neighborhood gossip and dispensed fatherly wisdom every month for 15 years. Sarah draped the striped cape around his shoulders, her fingers accidentally brushing against his neck. His skin felt clammy, almost feverish, and she noticed the subtle tremor in his hands as he gripped the chair's armrests. "You okay, hon? You seem a little tense." "Just tired," Marcus deflected, closing his eyes as Sarah began running her fingers through his hair to assess the cut needed. "Been pulling some long nights lately. 80-hour weeks, you know how it is." But Sarah did know, and what she was feeling beneath her experienced fingers wasn't the tension of overwork. His scalp felt different, tender in spots, with an unusual heat that radiated through her fingertips. As she sectioned his hair, preparing to begin the cut, her hands paused over an area near his hairline where the skin felt raised, almost swollen. "Marcus," she said carefully, "when did you start getting these headaches?" His eyes snapped open, meeting hers in the mirror's reflection. "How did you know about—" "You keep squinting, even in normal light. You're favoring your left side when you turn your head." And you just winced when I touched this spot." Sarah's fingers hovered over the area of concern, not quite making contact. "Have you seen a doctor?" Marcus's laugh held no humor. 3 doctors, actually. $47,000 in medical bills later, they all say the same thing. Stress, too much screen time, take some Advil and get more sleep. He gestured helplessly. Insurance company says it's all non-essential visits now that they've reclassified me as part-time. The scissors felt heavy in Sarah's hand as childhood training warred with professional instinct. She wasn't a doctor. Hadn't been for 15 years, not since she'd walked away from medicine after her husband's death. But the knowledge was still there, dormant but intact, and every alarm bell in her medical background was screaming warnings. Betty approached the chair, her weathered hands carrying the wisdom of 7 decades. "Your daddy used to get headaches too, you know." "Right before he got sick." Her voice dropped to the gentle tone reserved for hard truths. "He waited too long to do something about it." "I can't afford to be sick right now," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ellen's working extra shifts at the school. We've got Emma's violin lessons. And the mortgage—" He stopped, overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility that had shaped his entire adult life. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Setting down her scissors, she moved to stand directly in front of Marcus, forcing him to meet her eyes. I'm going to part your hair and take a look at what's causing the pain, just to see. No charge, no judgment. But if I find something that concerns me, you're going to listen to what I have to say." The barbershop fell silent, except for the steady tick of the old wall clock and the distant hum of traffic outside. Marcus stared at his reflection, seeing his father's face in his own features, remembering promises made in hospital rooms and debts that had taken years to pay off. "Okay," he whispered, "but just a look." Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision, parting sections of his hair with the methodical care of someone who understood that details could mean the difference between life and death. What she found beneath the surface would force them all to confront truths they'd been avoiding, about health, about community, and about the price of silence in the face of systematic failure. Sarah's fingers moved through Marcus's hair with the methodical precision of someone trained to find what others might miss. The afternoon light streaming through the barbershop's large windows provided perfect illumination as she carefully parted each section, her breathing growing shorter with each discovery. What started as a routine examination was quickly becoming something far more serious. "Hold still," she murmured, her voice taking on the clinical tone she hadn't used in 15 years. Near Marcus's left temple, hidden beneath a thick wave of brown hair, her fingertips encountered something that made her blood run cold. The skin felt different here, raised, irregular, with a texture that no healthy mole should possess. Marcus tensed in the chair as Sarah's fingers lingered over the spot. "What is it?" "You're making me nervous with all this poking around. Just let me get a better look." Sarah reached for the magnifying glass Betty kept for detailed work, her hands trembling slightly as memories of her oncology rotation flooded back. She'd seen this before, in textbooks and on patients whose cases had haunted her dreams. The irregular borders, the varied coloration from brown to black with hints of red, these weren't characteristics of benign skin changes. Betty approached from behind, her experienced eyes taking in Sarah's sudden pallor. "What's got you looking like you've seen a ghost, dear?" Sarah lifted the magnifying glass, positioning it to catch the light perfectly. What she saw through the lens made her stomach drop. The lesion was larger than it had initially appeared, roughly the size of a quarter, with jagged edges that seemed to blend into the surrounding skin. Worse still, there appeared to be smaller satellite lesions nearby, a pattern she recognized from her medical training as a sign of aggressive spread. "Marcus," Sarah said carefully, setting down the magnifying glass with deliberate calm, "I need you to be completely honest with me. How long has this been here? What's this?" Marcus tried to turn his head, but Sarah's gentle pressure kept him facing forward. "There's a dark spot on your scalp. It's significant." Sarah pulled out her phone, switching on the flashlight function. "I'm going to take a photo so you can see what I'm seeing." "Whoa, hold on." Marcus's voice rose in panic. "You're not taking pictures of my head like I'm some kind of medical case study. I just came in for a haircut." "Marcus Thompson, you sit still this instant," Betty commanded with the authority of someone who'd been cutting hair since before he was born. "Sarah knows what she's talking about." "Let her do what she needs to do." Sarah positioned her phone carefully, capturing clear images of the lesion from multiple angles. When she turned the screen toward Marcus, his face went white. The photograph showed what appeared to be an angry, irregular mass of tissue that bore no resemblance to any normal skin formation. "Jesus Christ," Marcus whispered, his hands gripping the chair arms until his knuckles went white. "What the hell is that thing?" "I can't diagnose you," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the terror building in her chest. "But I can tell you what it looks like to someone who spent 2 years working in oncology before I came here." She paused, weighing her words carefully. "Marcus, this has characteristics consistent with melanoma, advanced melanoma." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus stared at his reflection in the mirror, seeing not himself but his father lying in a hospital bed, machines beeping, bills piling up, family members whispering in hallways about treatments they couldn't afford. "No," he said, shaking his head violently. "No, that's not possible. I'm 32 years old. I don't even go outside that much. The doctors I saw, 3 different doctors, they all said it was stress." "When did you first notice the headaches?" Sarah pressed, her medical training overriding her role as neighborhood hairdresser. "3 months ago, maybe 4. Marcus's voice cracked. "They started small, just little twinges. Then they got worse. But I've been working crazy hours, staring at screens 14 hours a day." It made sense that, "Marcus, listen to me." Sarah placed both hands on his shoulders, forcing him to meet her eyes in the mirror. "Melanoma can spread to the brain. The headaches, the vision problems you mentioned, the way you're holding your head, these could all be connected." Betty moved closer, her weathered face creased with concern. "Honey, your daddy waited too long when he got sick. Don't make the same mistake." "I can't afford to make any mistake," Marcus exploded, standing abruptly and pulling off the barber cape. "Do you know what 3 doctor visits cost me? $47,000. And they found nothing. Now my insurance company has reclassified me as part-time so they can cut my benefits. If I go to another doctor and it turns out to be nothing again, we'll lose the house. And if you don't go and it turns out to be something, you'll lose your life." Sarah shot back, her own emotional walls crumbling. "My husband died because nobody caught his condition in time. I won't watch it happen again." The barbershop fell silent except for the steady tick of the wall clock. Through the front window they could see Ellen Thompson walking up the sidewalk, coming to pick up Marcus as she did every Tuesday. Her bright yellow sundress and cheerful smile seemed to belong to a different universe than the medical crisis unfolding inside. Marcus looked at the photograph on Sarah's phone one more time, then at his reflection in the mirror. For a moment, he saw himself as he truly was. Not the successful IT professional he pretended to be, but a scared man carrying his father's legacy of pride and financial terror. "What am I supposed to tell her?" he whispered, nodding toward Ellen's approaching figure. "The truth," Sarah said simply, "before it's too late to matter." The bell above the door chimed as Ellen entered, her smile fading instantly as she took in the scene, Marcus pale and shaking, Sarah clutching her phone with obvious distress, Betty wringing her hands with worry. "What's wrong?" Ellen asked, her teacher's instincts immediately detecting crisis. "Marcus, you look terrible." Ellen Thompson stepped through the barbershop door with the casual confidence of someone whose biggest concern was whether to pick up groceries before or after collecting her husband. The yellow sundress she wore seemed to capture all the remaining sunshine of the late afternoon, a stark contrast to the heavy atmosphere that had settled over the small space like a storm cloud. "What's wrong?" she asked again, her teacher's instincts immediately cataloging the tension in the room. Marcus stood frozen beside the barber chair, his face drained of color, while Sarah clutched her phone like it contained a bomb. Betty Patterson, who had weathered 72 years of neighborhood dramas, looked genuinely shaken. Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came. How do you tell the person you love most that the thing you've both been ignoring might actually be killing you? How do you explain that the financial stability you've built together could crumble under the weight of medical bills that would dwarf their mortgage? Sarah stepped forward, her nurturing instincts overriding professional boundaries. "Ellen, honey, maybe you should sit down." She guided the younger woman to the waiting area chairs, their vinyl surfaces cracked from decades of anxious spouses and worried parents. "Nobody's telling me to sit down unless someone's about to deliver terrible news," Ellen said, her voice rising with each word. "Marcus, what is going on? You've been acting strange for months, and now you look like you've seen a ghost." Betty moved to the front door, flipping the open sign to closed and turning the lock. Some conversations required privacy, and she'd learned over 5 decades in business that the worst news always seemed to arrive on ordinary Tuesday afternoons when the world should have been safe and predictable. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Sarah found something on my scalp. She thinks it might be serious." Ellen's eyes darted between her husband and the hairdresser who had become something more than a neighborhood service provider. "What kind of serious? Like, you need to see a dermatologist serious, or—" She couldn't finish the sentence, as if speaking the word cancer aloud might make it real. Sarah held up her phone, the photograph still displayed on the screen. "I can't make a medical diagnosis, but I worked in oncology before I came here. What I'm seeing has characteristics that concern me deeply." She paused, weighing each word carefully. "It looks like melanoma that may have been developing for months." The word hit Ellen like a physical blow. She sank into the waiting chair, her hands instinctively moving to her stomach as if protecting something vulnerable inside. No, that's not possible. He's 32 years old. He works inside all day. He uses sunscreen when we go to the lake with Emma." "Melanoma doesn't always follow the rules we think it should," Sarah said gently, moving to kneel beside Ellen's chair. "And if it spread to his brain, that would explain the headaches, the vision problems, the personality changes you've probably been noticing." Ellen's head snapped up. "What personality changes?" Marcus and Ellen stared at each other across the small space, months of unspoken tensions suddenly taking on terrifying new meaning. The late nights he'd blamed on work deadlines, the irritability he'd attributed to stress, the way he'd withdrawn from family activities, claiming exhaustion, but really trying to hide the increasing severity of his symptoms. "The headaches started in February," Ellen said slowly, her teacher's mind organizing information into a timeline. "You said they were from too much screen time. Then you started having trouble sleeping. You blamed it on the Peterson account, but that project ended in March." Her voice grew stronger as pieces clicked into place. "You've been lying to me." "I wasn't lying," Marcus protested, but his voice carried no conviction. "I was trying to protect you. Do you know what happened to my family when Dad got sick? The medical bills destroyed us. We lost the house. Mom worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. I swore I'd never put you and Emma through that. So instead you decided to just die quietly and leave us with nothing but grief?" Ellen's words came out sharp enough to cut glass. "That's your solution to protecting your family?" Betty intervened with the wisdom of someone who had witnessed this exact conversation too many times over the decades. "Ellen, honey, he's scared. Men of his generation, they were taught that being sick is being weak. Marcus's daddy died thinking he was protecting his family by not seeking treatment until it was too late. And look how well that worked out," Ellen snapped, then immediately regretted her harshness. She reached for Marcus's hand, finding it cold and trembling. "I'm sorry. I'm not angry at you for being sick. I'm angry at you for carrying this alone." Sarah watched the couple navigate their crisis, her own memories of similar conversations with her late husband surfacing unbidden. The military had taught him to suffer in silence, to push through pain, to never admit weakness. It had killed him just as surely as the aneurysm that had taken his life. "We need to get you to an emergency room," Sarah said, her medical training reasserting itself. "If this is what I think it is, and if it's causing neurological symptoms, time is critical." Marcus laughed bitterly. "With what money? My insurance company just reclassified me as a part-time contractor to reduce their liability. My coverage went from 80% to 40%, and that's only after I meet a $10,000 deductible. An ER visit alone will cost us $5,000 minimum." "Then we'll figure out the money later," Ellen said fiercely. "We'll sell the house if we have to. We'll start a GoFundMe. We'll ask both our families for help, but you are not dying because we can't afford to save you." "That's exactly what will happen," Marcus said, pulling his hand away from hers. "We'll go into debt trying to treat something that might not even be treatable. Emma's college fund will disappear. You'll end up working yourself to death trying to pay off medical bills. And for what? So I can live an extra 6 months?" The barber shop filled with the kind of silence that follows ultimatums and hard truths. Outside, the afternoon shadows were growing longer, and the normal rhythm of suburban life continued oblivious to the life and death decisions being made inside the small business that had served this community for half a century. Sarah broke the silence by pulling up her phone's internet browser. "I'm going to call Dr. Patricia Williams at Dallas General. She was my supervisor when I worked oncology. She'll see you today if I ask her to." "I can't pay for—" Marcus began. "Let me worry about that," Sarah interrupted. "You concentrate on staying alive long enough for us to figure out the money part." Ellen stood up abruptly, pacing to the front window where she could see their modest house across the street. The American flag they'd hung for the 4th of July still fluttered from their front porch, a symbol of the dreams and security that now felt as fragile as tissue paper. "Do you remember what you said to me when we got married?" she asked, without turning around. "You said, 'For better or worse, in sickness and in health.' You didn't say, 'unless the medical bills get too expensive.'" Marcus joined her at the window, both of them looking at the life they'd built together, the small yard where Emma played, the swing set he'd assembled last summer, the garden Ellen had planted with hopes of saving money on groceries. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice breaking on the words. "I'm scared of being sick, and I'm scared of not being sick. I'm scared of the pain, and I'm scared of the bills, and I'm scared of leaving you and Emma alone." He leaned his forehead against the cool glass. "But mostly, I'm scared of being like my father, too proud to ask for help until it was too late to matter." Ellen turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Then don't be like your father. Be like the man I married. Be like the father Emma needs. Be brave enough to fight instead of brave enough to die quietly." Betty moved to her old cash register, pulling out a worn address book that had served the barber shop for decades. "I'm calling in some favors," she announced. "Mrs. Chen's son is a doctor at Presbyterian. The Rodriguez family runs that medical billing advocacy service downtown, and my nephew works for Channel 8 News." She looked up at Marcus and Ellen with the fierce determination of someone who had lived through the Great Depression and understood that survival sometimes required the entire community to rally around one of their own. "What are you doing?" Marcus asked. "What this neighborhood has always done when one of our own is in trouble," Betty replied, already dialing the first number. "We're going to save your life, and we're going to figure out how to pay for it. But first, we're going to make sure every other person in this community knows what to look for so this doesn't happen to anyone else." Sarah was already on her phone with Dr. Williams, using medical terminology that reminded everyone in the room that she was far more than just a hairdresser who had noticed something wrong. Ellen held Marcus's hand tightly, both of them staring at their reflection in the barber shop's front window as their ordinary Tuesday afternoon transformed into the day that would define the rest of their lives. The golden hour light painted everything in warm tones, but none of them were fooled by the beauty of the moment. They all understood that the next few hours would determine whether Marcus Thompson would become another casualty of a healthcare system that prioritized profit over patience, or whether the community that had shaped his childhood would prove strong enough to save his life. The emergency room at Dallas General Hospital buzzed with the controlled chaos that marked the end of another busy Tuesday. Dr. Patricia Williams moved between patients with the efficient grace of someone who had spent 15 years navigating medical crises, her white coat bearing the subtle stains of a profession where life and death decisions happened between coffee breaks and chart reviews. When her phone rang with Sarah Mitchell's number, Patricia almost didn't answer. She remembered Sarah from the oncology ward. Brilliant, intuitive, someone who could have been an exceptional doctor if life hadn't intervened. Sarah's abrupt departure from medicine after her husband's death had been a loss the department still felt. "Sarah? It's been years. How are you?" Patricia's voice carried genuine warmth despite the hectic environment around her. "I need a favor, Patricia. A big one." Sarah's voice was tight with urgency. "I have a patient. Well, he's not officially my patient, but I found something that has me scared. Really scared." Patricia stepped into an empty exam room, closing the door behind her. "What are we talking about?" 32-year-old male, presenting with chronic headaches for 3 to 4 months, vision disturbances, personality changes. "I found what appears to be a melanoma on his scalp. Irregular borders, multiple colors, satellite lesions. It's advanced, Patricia, and I think it's metastasized to his brain." The line went quiet for a moment. Patricia had worked with Sarah long enough to trust her clinical judgment, even though she'd been out of medicine for over a decade. "Where is he now?" "Sitting in a barber shop, terrified to come to the hospital because he can't afford the bills. His insurance was just downgraded, and he's already $47,000 in medical debt from previous visits where doctors missed this completely." Patricia felt the familiar anger that came with stories like this. Patients suffering not from lack of available treatment, but from a system that prioritized financial screening over medical necessity. "Bring him in through the ambulance bay. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. And Sarah, don't let him refuse treatment because of money. We'll figure that part out later." Back at the barbershop, the atmosphere had shifted from panic to determined action. Betty Patterson worked her phone like a campaign manager, calling in decades of neighborhood connections. Mrs. Chen arrived within minutes. Her son, Dr. Michael Chen, already en route from Presbyterian Hospital for a second opinion. The Rodriguez family's medical billing advocacy service was mobilizing their resources to fight whatever insurance battles lay ahead. Marcus sat in stunned silence as his private medical crisis became a community mobilization. Ellen held his hand tightly. Her earlier anger transformed into fierce, protective determination. The reality of their situation was settling in. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about survival. And survival sometimes required accepting help from unexpected sources. "I can't let all these people get involved in our problems," Marcus said weakly, gesturing toward Betty's phone calls and the growing number of neighbors gathering outside the barbershop windows. "It's too late for that kind of pride," Ellen replied firmly. "These people care about you, about us. Sometimes letting people help is the bravest thing you can do." Sarah ended her call with Dr. Williams and moved to crouch beside Marcus's chair. "She'll see you immediately. No questions about insurance, no pre-authorization requirements. We're going to drive you there now, and we're going to get some answers." "I should drive myself," Marcus protested. "I can't have you all disrupting your lives for something that might turn out to be nothing." "Honey," Betty interjected, looking up from her address book, "you can barely walk straight, your hands are shaking, and you just admitted you've been having vision problems. You are not driving anywhere." Dr. Michael Chen burst through the barbershop door with the energy of someone accustomed to medical emergencies. At 35, he carried himself with the confident bearing of a surgeon, but his eyes held the gentle compassion of someone raised in this neighborhood who understood that medicine was about more than diagnoses and treatments. "Mom called me," he said, moving directly to Marcus without preamble. "May I take a look?" Marcus nodded mutely as Dr. Chen positioned himself behind the barber chair, his trained hands immediately finding the area Sarah had identified. His expression grew grave as he examined the lesion, using a small penlight to study the tissue characteristics. "Sarah's right to be concerned," he said quietly. "This needs immediate attention from an oncologist. The neurological symptoms you're describing, headaches, vision changes, they're consistent with metastatic melanoma affecting brain function." Ellen's grip on Marcus's hand tightened until her knuckles went white. "How immediate?" "We should have had you in a hospital yesterday," Dr. Chen replied honestly. "But we have you here now, and that's what matters. I'm going to call ahead to Dallas General and make sure they're ready for you." The barbershop had become an impromptu command center. Betty coordinated transportation while Mrs. Chen organized a meal train for Ellen and Emma. The Rodriguez family's advocacy service was already on the phone with Marcus's insurance company, demanding explanations for the coverage changes and preparing to fight any denials of emergency treatment. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the sudden transformation of his private struggle into a community cause. "This is too much," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't deserve all this attention." "That's where you're wrong," Sarah said firmly. "Every person in this room has been touched by this kind of medical crisis. Mrs. Chen's husband had a heart attack last year and fought insurance denials for 6 months. The Rodriguez family nearly lost their house to medical bills when their daughter needed surgery. Betty's brother died from a treatable condition because he waited too long to see a doctor." She paused, looking around the room at the faces of people who had become more than neighbors. They had become family. "We're not doing this just for you, Marcus. We're doing this because every time someone in our community gets properly treated, it sets a precedent. Every time we fight the system and win, it makes it easier for the next person." Ellen stood up, moving to the front window where she could see their house across the street. Emma would be getting off the school bus in an hour, expecting a normal afternoon of homework and dinner preparation. Instead, she would learn that her father was facing a life-threatening illness that could change everything about their family's future. "How do I tell an 8-year-old that her daddy might be really sick?" Ellen asked, her voice barely audible. Betty approached, placing a gentle hand on Ellen's shoulder. "The same way my mother told me when my daddy got sick during the Depression. You tell her the truth in words she can understand, and you promise her that every adult in her life is going to fight as hard as they can to make sure he gets better." Dr. Chen finished his preliminary examination and moved to where Ellen stood by the window. "I want you to understand something important," he said quietly. "Melanoma is aggressive, especially when it's advanced, but it's also highly treatable with current therapies, even in metastatic cases. The key is acting quickly and aggressively." "What does that mean exactly?" Ellen asked. "It means surgery, possibly radiation, definitely immunotherapy or targeted therapy, depending on the genetic characteristics of the tumor. It means a long treatment process, significant side effects, and yes, substantial medical bills." Dr. Chen's honesty was both frightening and reassuring, but it also means hope. Real hope, with good statistical outcomes if we catch it before it spreads further. Marcus looked around the barber shop that had been the backdrop to so many ordinary moments of his life. Childhood haircuts with his father, teenage conversations about girls and college plans, adult discussions about career changes and family planning. Now, it was the place where his life had been saved by a hairdresser with medical training and a community that refused to let one of their own face crisis alone. "Okay," he said finally, his voice stronger than it had been all day. "Let's go fight this thing." The late afternoon sun streamed through the barbershop windows as the impromptu medical team prepared for the journey to Dallas General Hospital. Outside, more neighbors had gathered, their faces reflecting the same determined concern that had mobilized resources and connections with remarkable speed. This was American community at its finest. Ordinary people refusing to accept that financial barriers should determine who lived and who died. neighbors becoming advocates, and a hairdresser's medical intuition potentially saving a life that 3 previous doctors had failed to properly evaluate. The fluorescent lights of Dallas General Hospital's emergency department cast everything in harsh, clinical white. As Marcus Thompson was wheeled through the automatic doors on a gurney, his world reduced to ceiling tiles and concerned voices speaking in medical terminology above his head. The transition from Betty Patterson's familiar barbershop to this sterile environment felt like crossing into another universe, one where his life would be measured in test results and treatment protocols rather than neighborhood conversations and family dinners. Dr. Patricia Williams met them at the ambulance bay, her experienced eyes immediately assessing Marcus's condition as the paramedics transferred him to the hospital gurney. Sarah walked alongside, providing a detailed report that impressed the medical team with its thoroughness and accuracy. Ellen followed close behind, clutching Marcus's personal effects and trying to process how quickly their ordinary Tuesday had transformed into a medical emergency. "I need a CT scan of his head immediately," Dr. Williams instructed the nursing staff, "and I want dermatology and oncology consults within the hour. This patient presents with what appears to be advanced melanoma with possible brain metastases." Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions. But Sarah caught the subtle tension that indicated serious concern. The next 3 hours unfolded in a blur of medical procedures, insurance paperwork, and waiting room anxiety. Ellen found herself caught between advocating for her husband's immediate treatment and grappling with the financial reality of their situation. The hospital's financial counselor, a well-meaning woman named Jennifer Martinez, explained that even with Marcus's reduced insurance coverage, they were looking at potential out-of-pocket expenses of over $200,000. "That's more than we paid for our house," Ellen said numbly, staring at the preliminary cost estimates spread across the small consultation table. "How is anyone supposed to afford that?" Jennifer had clearly had this conversation countless times before. "We have payment plans available, and there are some charitable programs for families in financial hardship. But I have to be honest with you. Most of our patients facing this kind of diagnosis end up filing for medical bankruptcy within the first year of treatment." The words hit Ellen like physical blows. Medical bankruptcy. The phrase seemed to encapsulate everything wrong with a system that could offer miraculous treatments while simultaneously destroying the financial stability of the families it claimed to help. She thought of Emma, still at school, blissfully unaware that her parents were facing a choice between Daddy's life and their family's economic survival. Meanwhile, Marcus lay in examination room 7, his body connected to monitors that beeped with reassuring regularity while his mind raced through worst-case scenarios. The CT scan had been completed, and now he waited for results that would either confirm his worst fears or provide the miracle of a less serious diagnosis. Dr. Williams had been kind but direct. The lesion on his scalp was definitely concerning, and the neurological symptoms suggested the cancer had likely spread. Sarah remained by his bedside, her presence a bridge between his current medical crisis and the familiar world of the neighborhood barber shop. "You know," she said quietly, "when I was working in oncology, I saw a lot of patients with melanoma. The treatments have improved dramatically in just the past 5 years. People are surviving advanced cases that would have been death sentences a decade ago." "But surviving at what cost?" Marcus replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Even if the treatment works, how do Ellen and Emma recover from the financial devastation? How do I justify bankrupting my family for the chance to live a few more years?" Before Sarah could respond, Dr. Williams returned with Marcus's test results, her expression carefully controlled in the way medical professionals learn to deliver difficult news. Ellen was called back from her financial consultation, and the 3 of them gathered around Marcus's bedside for what they all understood would be a life-changing conversation. The CT scan confirms our suspicions, Dr. Williams began, pulling up the digital images on a portable computer. You have multiple lesions in your brain consistent with metastatic melanoma. The primary tumor on your scalp has been growing for several months, possibly longer, and has spread through your lymphatic system. Ellen's hand found Marcus's, both of them staring at the brain scan that showed small white spots scattered throughout the gray tissue like deadly confetti. The clinical presentation of their personal nightmare was somehow both more real and more surreal than they had imagined. "What does this mean for treatment options?" Ellen asked, her teacher's training helping her organize her thoughts even in crisis. "It means we need to act aggressively and immediately," Dr. Williams replied. "Surgery to remove the primary tumor and as many brain lesions as possible, followed by targeted radiation and immunotherapy. The good news is that melanoma responds well to current treatments, even in advanced cases. The challenging news is that the treatment protocol is intensive, expensive, and will require months of commitment." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of impossible decisions settling over him like a suffocating blanket. "Dr. Williams, I need you to be completely honest with me. What are my chances of surviving this, and what kind of life am I looking at if the treatment works?" The doctor appreciated his directness. "With aggressive treatment, you have approximately a 60 to 70% chance of achieving remission. If we can eliminate the brain lesions and prevent further spread, you could potentially return to a normal life within 18 to 24 months. Without treatment, you're looking at weeks to months before the neurological symptoms become severe enough to significantly impact your quality of life." The room fell silent, except for the steady beeping of monitors and the distant sounds of hospital activity. Ellen stared at her husband's face, memorizing the details she had taken for granted for so many years. The small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident, the way his eyes crinkled when he was thinking hard about something, the stubborn cowlick that had never responded to any amount of hair product. "There's something else you need to know," Dr. Williams continued. "Based on the size and characteristics of these lesions, this cancer has been developing for at least 6 months, possibly longer. The doctors who examined you previously should have caught this with proper screening. What happened to you represents a significant failure in our healthcare system." Sarah felt a surge of vindicated anger mixed with profound sadness. How many other patients are walking around with undiagnosed conditions because their symptoms are dismissed as stress or age-related issues? "More than any of us want to admit," Dr. Williams replied honestly. "The combination of rushed appointments, insurance pressure to minimize testing, and patients who delay seeking care due to cost concerns creates a perfect storm for missed diagnoses." As if summoned by their conversation about financial pressures, Jennifer Martinez appeared in the doorway with additional paperwork and a grave expression. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been a development with your insurance coverage. Your insurance company is declining to authorize the recommended treatment protocol, claiming it's experimental and not medically necessary." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Ellen felt her legs go weak, and Sarah moved quickly to support her. Marcus opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling, finally understanding that his father's nightmare was about to become his own, not because treatment wasn't available, but because the system had decided his life wasn't worth the cost of providing it. The revelation about Marcus's insurance denial hit the hospital room like a physical force, sucking the oxygen from the air and leaving everyone stunned into momentary silence. Ellen stared at Jennifer Martinez as if the financial counselor had just announced that gravity had been suspended, her mind unable to process how a life-saving treatment could be deemed not medically necessary by people who had never examined her husband. "I don't understand," Ellen said, her voice rising with each word. "How can brain cancer treatment be considered experimental? People get treated for this every day." Jennifer's expression reflected the weary frustration of someone who had delivered this news too many times. Your husband's insurance company is claiming that the combination of surgery, radiation, and immunotherapy represents an aggressive treatment protocol that exceeds their coverage guidelines for stage 4 melanoma. They're recommending palliative care instead. Palliative care, Marcus repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. You mean they want me to just go home and die comfortably? Dr. Williams stepped forward, her professional composure cracking slightly. This is exactly the kind of bureaucratic interference that kills patients. The treatment protocol I'm recommending is standard care for metastatic melanoma. It's been approved by every major cancer organization in the country. She turned to Jennifer with barely contained anger. Who made this decision? I want to speak to them directly. The decision came from Dr. Richard Hastings, the company's chief medical officer, Jennifer replied, consulting her paperwork. He reviewed the case files and determined that the proposed treatment has insufficient evidence of efficacy to justify the cost. Sarah felt something cold and familiar settling in her chest, the same helpless rage she had experienced when her husband's military insurance had delayed authorization for the brain imaging that might have saved his life. They're basically sentencing him to death over money, she said, her voice cutting through the clinical atmosphere like a blade. Ellen pulled out her phone with shaking hands, her teacher's instincts telling her to document everything. I want that decision in writing. I want the medical credentials of everyone who signed off on it, and I want to know what appeals process is available. Her voice carried a steel that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. Dr. Williams moved to her computer, pulling up Marcus's file and beginning to type with rapid, angry keystrokes. I'm writing a formal appeal right now, and I'm calling Dr. Hastings personally. This is medical malpractice disguised as cost containment. But even as the medical team rallied around Marcus's case, the financial reality loomed like a shadow over everything. Without insurance coverage, the treatment Dr. Williams recommended would cost approximately $350,000. The number was so large it seemed abstract, like trying to comprehend the distance to a star. Marcus watched his wife transform from a worried spouse into a fierce advocate, her elementary school teacher training suddenly revealing itself as preparation for navigating bureaucratic systems and fighting for vulnerable people. But he also saw the calculation happening in her eyes, the mental arithmetic of mortgage payments, Emma's future, and the crushing weight of debt that would survive even if he didn't. Ellen, he said quietly, reaching for her hand. Maybe we should consider what they're suggesting, the palliative care option. Absolutely not. Ellen's response came so quickly and forcefully that it surprised everyone in the room. I will not listen to you give up before we've even started fighting. I'm not giving up, Marcus protested. I'm being realistic about what this would do to our family's future. Emma's 8 years old. She has college to think about, her whole life ahead of her. How can I justify destroying her financial future for a 60% chance that I'll survive this? Sarah stepped forward, her own grief and loss suddenly crystallizing into fierce determination. Because that 8-year-old girl needs her father more than she needs a college fund. Because your wife needs her husband more than she needs financial security. And because if we let them win this time, the next family won't even get the chance to fight. Doctor. Williams looked up from her computer, where she had been composing what appeared to be a strongly worded appeal. I've been practicing medicine for 15 years, and I've seen this exact scenario play out dozens of times. Insurance companies count on families being too overwhelmed and too scared to fight their decisions. They budget for a certain percentage of appeals, knowing that most people will simply accept the denial and choose the cheaper option. Jennifer Martinez, who had been quietly observing the emotional dynamics in the room, spoke up with obvious reluctance. There is one other option we haven't discussed. If you can demonstrate genuine financial hardship, and if we can get media attention on your case, sometimes the insurance companies will reverse their decisions to avoid negative publicity. Media attention, Ellen repeated, the phrase carrying implications that made her stomach clench. You mean make our private medical crisis into a public spectacle? Sometimes that's what it takes, Dr. Williams said bluntly. I have contacts at several local news stations. Medical insurance denials make compelling human interest stories, especially when the patient is young and the treatment is clearly medically appropriate. Marcus felt the walls of his privacy collapsing around him. The thought of strangers discussing his medical condition on the evening news, of becoming a poster child for healthcare reform, filled him with a different kind of dread than the cancer itself. But as he looked at Ellen's determined face and thought about Emma coming home from school to an empty house if he chose to give up, the choice began to seem less impossible. Meanwhile, back at Patterson's barbershop, Betty was orchestrating her own campaign. The neighborhood network she had spent decades building was proving remarkably effective at mobilizing resources and connections. Mrs. Chen's son had contacted his medical school classmates, several of whom were now practicing oncologists willing to provide second opinions. The Rodriguez family's advocacy service had uncovered irregularities in how Marcus's insurance coverage had been changed, suggesting possible grounds for a discrimination lawsuit. Most significantly, Betty's nephew at Channel 8 News had expressed strong interest in the story after learning about the insurance denial. Medical insurance companies denying cancer treatment to cut costs was exactly the kind of story that resonated with viewers who had their own horror stories about dealing with healthcare bureaucracy. We've got 3 oncologists willing to go on record saying the treatment is absolutely standard care, Betty reported in a phone call to Sarah at the hospital. And the news team wants to interview Marcus and Ellen tonight if they're willing. Sarah relayed the information to the family, watching as Ellen and Marcus exchanged looks that communicated volumes about trust, desperation, and the lengths they were willing to go to save their life together. The decision to make their private struggle public wasn't just about insurance coverage. It was about choosing to fight a system that seemed designed to wear down families until they accepted defeat. If we do this, Marcus said slowly, there's no going back. Everyone we know will know about the cancer, about our financial problems, about everything. Ellen moved to sit on the edge of his hospital bed, taking his face in her hands. Honey, everyone already knows. The whole neighborhood showed up at that barbershop when Sarah called for help. Mrs. Chen is organizing meals for us. The Rodriguez family is fighting our insurance company, and Betty has half of Dallas making phone calls on our behalf. Her voice softened. We're not facing this alone anymore, whether we wanted help or not. Dr. Williams saved her appeal letter and turned back to the family. I need to tell you something about timing. Based on the progression I'm seeing in your scans, we have maybe 2 weeks before the neurological symptoms become significantly worse. If we're going to fight this insurance denial, we need to do it fast, and we need to do it publicly. The weight of the decision settled over Marcus like a heavy blanket. He thought about his father, who had died quietly and anonymously, never causing trouble for anyone, never asking for help that might inconvenience others. He thought about the promise he had made at his father's bedside, never to be a burden. But he also thought about Emma, who deserved to have her father walk her down the aisle someday. He thought about Ellen, who had married him expecting a lifetime partnership, not widowhood at 29. And he thought about all the other families who might face this same impossible choice if someone didn't stand up and fight back. Okay, he said, his voice stronger than it had been all day. Let's do it. Let's fight these bastards and win. The decision made, the room filled with renewed energy as everyone began making phone calls and coordinating the media strategy that would either save Marcus's life or make his final weeks a very public battle against a system that valued profit over patience. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of Patterson's barbershop with the golden warmth of early autumn, casting everything in the gentle light that photographers call the magic hour. Marcus Thompson sat in chair number 3, the same chair where his medical nightmare had begun, running his fingers through hair that had grown back thick and dark after months of chemotherapy. The latest scans, completed just 2 weeks ago, had shown no evidence of cancer anywhere in his body. Sarah Mitchell moved around him with practiced ease, her newly earned nurse practitioner certification hanging proudly on the wall beside her old hairdressing license. The dual credentials represented a journey back to medicine that had been catalyzed by Marcus's crisis, funded by a scholarship established by an anonymous donor who had read about their story in the national media coverage that had ultimately saved his life. "All clear," Sarah announced, completing her monthly examination of Marcus's scalp, a ritual that had evolved from medical necessity into a celebration of survival. "But you already knew that from last week's appointment with Dr. Williams." Marcus smiled, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Still feels good to hear it from the person who saved my life." The barbershop had transformed over the past 6 months into something unprecedented, a hybrid business that provided both traditional barber services and basic health screenings for the community. The Marcus Thompson Memorial Health Initiative, named ironically since Marcus was very much alive, had been featured in healthcare journals as an innovative model for early detection and community-based medical advocacy. Ellen Thompson entered through the front door carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the confident smile of someone who had learned that she was capable of fighting battles she had never imagined facing. The media campaign that had saved her husband's life had also revealed her natural talent for public advocacy, leading to her new position with a nonprofit organization dedicated to healthcare reform. Channel 8 wants to do a follow-up story for the 6-month anniversary, she announced, settling into the waiting area chairs that had witnessed so much drama and triumph. "They want to film here, show how the community health program is working." Betty Patterson looked up from her appointment book, her weathered face creasing into the satisfied smile of someone who had lived long enough to see justice prevail occasionally. At 73, she had become something of a local celebrity, featured in magazines as an example of how small business owners could become catalysts for community health initiatives. "Tell them they can film, but only if they mention that we've caught 12 cases of skin cancer in the past 6 months, Betty said with pride. 12 people who might not have gotten treatment if we weren't looking. The success statistics were remarkable. The monthly health screenings that Sarah conducted had identified not only multiple cases of skin cancer but also diabetes, hypertension, and depression that had gone undiagnosed in community members who couldn't afford regular medical care. The model was being replicated in barbershops and beauty salons across Texas, with plans for national expansion. Dr. Patricia Williams arrived for her monthly volunteer session, carrying the medical equipment that had been donated by the hospital after the insurance company settlement had made national headlines. The legal victory had been unprecedented. Not only had Marcus received full coverage for his treatment, but the insurance company had been forced to establish a fund for other families facing similar denials. "How's our star patient today, Doctor?" Williams asked, pulling on medical gloves with the easy familiarity of someone who had become part of the barbershop's extended family. "Cancer-free and grateful," Marcus replied, though the words carried deeper meaning than their simplicity suggested. The past 6 months had been a brutal education in the realities of cancer treatment, the surgery that had removed portions of his skull, the radiation that had left him exhausted and nauseated for weeks, the immunotherapy that had rebuilt his immune system while destroying his energy levels. But he had survived, and more importantly, he had helped create a system that might prevent other families from facing the same bureaucratic nightmare that had nearly cost him his life. Ellen moved to stand behind Marcus's chair, her hands resting on his shoulders, in a gesture that had become natural over the months of treatment and recovery. "Doctor Hastings called yesterday," she said, referring to the insurance company's chief medical officer who had initially denied Marcus's treatment. "He wants to meet with us about establishing treatment protocols that prevent situations like ours." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The same man who had essentially sentenced Marcus to death over cost considerations was now seeking to use their case as a model for more humane insurance policies. The media attention had been so intense and so negative for the insurance company that they had been forced to fundamentally restructure their approval processes. Sarah cleaned her medical instruments while mentally reviewing the afternoon schedule. 3 routine health screenings, a follow-up examination for Mrs. Rodriguez's suspicious mole, and a consultation with a family whose 8-year-old daughter had been complaining of headaches. The variety of her work now encompassed everything she had loved about medicine while maintaining the community connections that had drawn her to the barbershop originally. "You know what I realized yesterday?" Marcus said, watching the familiar bustle of neighborhood life through the front windows. "My dad would have been proud of what we did, not just surviving the cancer, but fighting back against the system that failed him." The mention of his father brought a moment of reflective silence to the barbershop. Everyone understood that Marcus's recovery was about more than just medical treatment. It was about breaking a generational cycle of accepting injustice in the name of avoiding conflict. Betty approached with a framed photograph that had arrived in the morning mail, a picture of a barbershop in Detroit where they had just implemented their health screening model. The accompanying letter described how they had identified a case of early-stage melanoma in a 45-year-old auto worker who had been ignoring a changing mole for months. "That's 15 barbershops now," Betty said with satisfaction. 15 communities where people are getting screened who never would have seen a doctor otherwise. The transformation of their personal crisis into a national movement had been unexpected and overwhelming. Marcus had become an accidental spokesperson for healthcare reform. Ellen had discovered a talent for policy advocacy, and Sarah had returned to medicine through an unconventional path that combined her hairdressing skills with her medical training. Dr. Williams completed her examination of Mrs. Chen, who had become a regular patient after discovering that her age spots were actually early signs of skin damage that required monitoring. "Everything looks good, but I want to see you again in 3 months," she said, making notes in the medical chart that would be forwarded to Mrs. Chen's primary care physician. The integration of the barbershop screenings with formal medical care had been one of the program's greatest successes. Rather than replacing traditional health care, the community screenings served as an early warning system that helped people access appropriate medical care before minor issues became major crises. Emma Thompson burst through the front door with the energy of an 8-year-old who had just finished school, her backpack bouncing as she ran to hug her father. The past 6 months had been difficult for her, watching her father lose his hair, seeing her parents stressed about money, experiencing the disruption that serious illness brings to a family's normal routines. But she had also witnessed something remarkable: an entire community rallying around her family, adults working together to solve problems, and her parents fighting for something important and winning. The experience had shaped her understanding of what adults could accomplish when they refused to accept unfairness. "Daddy, Mrs. Patterson says I can help with the health fair next month," Emma announced, settling into the chair beside her father. "I want to make posters about checking for weird spots on your skin." Marcus laughed, remembering when his biggest worry had been whether he could afford a haircut. The perspective that comes with surviving cancer had rearranged his priorities in ways that continued to surprise him. Financial security remained important, but it no longer dominated every decision. Family time had become sacred. Community connections had deepened into genuine friendships. As the afternoon wore on, the barbershop filled with its usual mix of customers seeking haircuts and community members stopping by for health screenings. The conversation flowed between sports, politics, family news, and medical updates with the easy familiarity of people who had shared both crisis and triumph. Sarah looked around the room, at Marcus getting his monthly trim, at Ellen coordinating media interviews, at Betty scheduling appointments for both barber services and medical consultations, at Dr. Williams examining a patient who might never have seen a doctor otherwise. The integration of healthcare into the community's daily life had created something unprecedented and beautiful. "You know what the best part is?" Sarah said to Marcus as she brushed loose hair from his shoulders. "We didn't just save your life. We figured out how to save other people's lives, too." Marcus nodded, understanding that their victory had been about more than beating cancer or defeating an insurance company. They had proven that ordinary people could challenge systems that seemed unchangeable, that communities could create solutions when institutions failed, and that sometimes the person cutting your hair really could save your life. The evening sun cast long shadows across the barbershop floor as another day of community care came to an end, promising tomorrow would bring new opportunities to notice, to care, and to act when someone needed help. Dear friends, Marcus Thompson's story isn't just about surviving cancer, it's about rediscovering what truly matters when life strips away everything we thought was important. At 32, Marcus learned what many of us don't realize until we're facing our own mortality, that the person cutting your hair might see you more clearly than you see yourself, that neighbors can become family when crisis calls, and that fighting for your life sometimes means letting others fight alongside you. For those of us who've lived long enough to watch friends disappear from holiday cards and family gatherings, Marcus's journey reminds us that community isn't just about shared zip codes, it's about shared humanity. Betty Patterson, at 72, proved that age brings not just wisdom, but the power to mobilize love into action. Sarah Mitchell showed us that dreams deferred aren't always dreams denied, and that sometimes our greatest calling finds us when we're simply trying to help someone else. We've all been Marcus at some point, too proud to ask for help, too scared to face hard truths, too worried about being a burden. But we've also been Sarah, Betty, and Ellen, the ones who notice when something's wrong and refuse to look away. What health warning signs have you ignored because you didn't want to worry your family? Have you ever been the person who spoke up when others stayed silent? And what happened when you did? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.